My older sister, Lauren, squandered her inheritance on designer purses and exotic getaways, then set her sights on mine when her funds ran dry, until a single document exposed every lie she thought she'd hidden. Lauren, now 27 and married to a guy named Derek, who's just as smug and self-entitled as she is, always had to be the one in control growing up. I'm 17, finishing high school and living with our Aunt Margaret after our father's passing. Lauren, on the other hand, is too caught up in her tantrums to take on real responsibilities. She and Aunt Margaret, they've been at odds for as long as I can recall. Lauren's always been a control freak, obsessed with running the show. As kids, she called all the shots. Board games, Lauren chose the game. Movie nights, it had to be her pick. If things didn't go her way, she'd throw a subtle, venomous fit until everyone caved. Most people gave in to avoid the drama, but not Aunt Margaret. She never indulged Lauren's antics, and Lauren despised her for it. One memory stands out from when we were younger. Dad was seriously ill, and Aunt Margaret stepped in to help. Lauren was supposed to be washing dishes, but was too busy texting Derek, acting oblivious. Aunt Margaret, no nonsense as ever, told her to get up and do her chores. Lauren scoffed, muttering, "You're not my boss." Aunt Margaret didn't flinch. "No," she replied, "but I'm not your servant either. Get moving." Lauren cleaned the dishes, slamming every plate in a huff. Later, she ranted to me about how Aunt Margaret always tried to control her. I stayed quiet, but Aunt Margaret was right. As we grew up, Lauren's resentment toward her only deepened. Aunt Margaret kept helping Dad with tasks Lauren ignored, driving him to doctor's visits, paying bills, keeping the house in order. Lauren called it interference, accusing Aunt Margaret of overstepping. I saw it for what it was. Stepping up. When Derek came into the picture, Lauren had already perfected her role as the family's perfect daughter. Derek worshipped her, feeding her ego, and Lauren thrived on it. Aunt Margaret saw through him from the start, calling him conceited and insincere. She wasn't wrong, but Lauren didn't care. To her, Derek was flawless, and she dismissed anyone who disagreed. Derek wasn't just arrogant, he was outright rude. Whenever he came over, he'd toss out snide remarks. If Dad made dinner, Derek would mumble, "Well, this is interesting." When I mentioned my dream of attending medical school, he'd smirk and say, "Hope you've got a plan B, kid. Not everyone makes it." Lauren never stood up for me. She'd just laugh like his comments were clever. Aunt Margaret, though, didn't let it slide. She'd either fire back with a sharp retort or ignore him completely, which drove him crazy. The tension between Lauren and Aunt Margaret worsened after Lauren married Derek. She rarely showed up to family gatherings, and when she did, it often ended in a dramatic exit after a fight. One Christmas, Lauren ranted about how some people didn't respect her marriage, clearly aiming at Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret just raised an eyebrow and said, "Respect is something you earn, not demand." Lauren stormed out, dragging Derek along, and we didn't hear from them for months. Despite it all, Aunt Margaret was always there for us. She wasn't just an aunt. She was like a second parent, especially after Lauren checked out emotionally. While Lauren played perfect wife with Derek, Aunt Margaret helped me with homework, drove me to school, and taught me how to cook more than just instant noodles. She never made me feel like a burden, even when I was struggling to cope with Dad's illness. The truth is, Lauren's anger toward Aunt Margaret was never about Aunt Margaret, it was about Lauren. Aunt Margaret saw through her selfishness, her manipulations, her facade. Lauren couldn't handle someone who wouldn't fall for her tricks, so she labeled Aunt Margaret the villain. Looking back, it's shocking how long Lauren held that grudge. Even after moving out and marrying Derek, she kept finding ways to complain about Aunt Margaret, saying things like, "Why is she always in our business?" Or, "She still treats me like a kid." Meanwhile, Aunt Margaret was keeping our family afloat, taking care of Dad and filling the gaps Lauren left behind. But I didn't realize how ugly things would get after Dad passed. That's when Lauren's resentment turned into something darker, a calculated obsession. By my junior year, Dad's heart condition became impossible to ignore. He'd get breathless just walking across the room, and some days he couldn't even get out of bed. Watching him deteriorate was gut-wrenching. This was the man who worked long hours but still made time to cook breakfast for me on weekends. Aunt Margaret stepped up even more, practically becoming a full-time caregiver. She was there almost daily, driving him to appointments, making sure he ate, and handling everything. Lauren, she was a ghost. I tried to keep her updated, texts, calls, voicemails. "Dad's really sick," I'd say. "You should come see him." But she always had an excuse. "Derek's working late," or "I'm swamped with work." The worst? "Tell me when it's really bad," like Dad's condition wasn't already critical. The night Dad collapsed is seared into my mind. I was doing homework in the kitchen when I heard a thud. I ran to the living room and found him on the floor, clutching his chest, pale and sweating. I froze, then called 911 and Aunt Margaret. She arrived before the ambulance, worried but steady, keeping me grounded. Lauren didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Dad's being rushed to the hospital. Come now. That hospital stay marked the beginning of the end. Dad was there for weeks, and every day I hoped Lauren would show up. She didn't. Aunt Margaret and I were there constantly, holding his hand, keeping him comfortable. The nurses knew us by name. Lauren finally called in the second week, only to complain about Derek's health issues. Apparently, Derek has some chronic condition. I don't know much about it, as he's never been open with me. Lauren used it as her go-to excuse. "You don't understand how tough this is for us," she'd say. "Derek's really struggling." Sure, illness is serious, but she wielded it like a shield to dodge Dad's situation. The day Dad passed, only Aunt Margaret and I were there. He was in and out of consciousness, barely able to talk. I held his hand while Aunt Margaret stroked his hair, whispering that it was okay to rest. When he took his last breath, the world seemed to stop. I sobbed harder than ever before. Aunt Margaret stayed with me even as I fell apart. Lauren didn't find out until hours later when I finally reached her. She acted shocked, saying, "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" I wanted to scream. I had told her. She just didn't care enough to listen. Lauren didn't even attend the funeral, claiming Derek was too sick to be left alone. Aunt Margaret and I handled everything, planning the service, sorting Dad's belongings, settling bills. Lauren sent a generic flower arrangement and a condolence card, and that was it. I was livid, but grief left me too drained to fight. A few days after the funeral, Aunt Margaret sat me down. "Your father left a will," she said. "We'll go over it with the lawyer soon." She put a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever's in it, I've got your back." I nodded, not fully grasping her meaning. I wasn't thinking about wills. I was just trying to survive each day. When Lauren finally showed up, she acted like she hadn't just skipped Dad's final days and funeral. She waltzed in, casual as ever, and asked, "So, what's the deal with the will?" Aunt Margaret gave her a cold look. "We'll find out with the lawyer," she said sharply. It was clear from the start. Lauren didn't care about Dad's memory or his possessions. She only wanted the money. She didn't ask about his keepsakes or photos, just what she'd get. It turned my stomach. Aunt Margaret, though, was determined to honor Dad's wishes. She knew how much Dad wanted me to pursue medical school, and she wasn't about to let Lauren derail that. When we met with the lawyer, I braced myself. Lauren had already made it clear she didn't want Aunt Margaret involved. But Dad's will had other ideas. It split the inheritance evenly between Lauren and me, but since I was still a minor, Aunt Margaret was named the trustee of my share. Lauren's face when she heard this, pure rage. She didn't explode right away, but her eyes burned with anger. Later, she cornered me. "You know Aunt Margaret doesn't really understand us, right?" she said in a syrupy tone. "She's always been distant, but we're siblings. We should stick together. If you need help with the money, just ask me." I didn't reply. I knew her game. She hated losing control and was trying to pull me to her side. But Aunt Margaret saw through it. That night she warned me, "Lauren's going to try to manipulate you. Don't fall for it. That money is for your future. Your dad trusted me to protect it, and I will." I didn't fully understand then, but I'm so glad I trusted her. Because what Lauren did next was a nightmare. The court date felt like the calm before a hurricane. Lauren filed a petition claiming Aunt Margaret was manipulating me, mismanaging my inheritance, and trying to control my life for her own gain. It was nonsense, but Lauren was banking on her act to sway the judge. If she won, she'd become the trustee of my share until I turned 18, giving her full control. She didn't just want a piece of it, she wanted everything. Aunt Margaret stayed unshaken. She dealt with Lauren's schemes for years and knew how to keep her cool. We worked with our lawyer, Mr. Thompson, to gather evidence to expose Lauren's true intentions. Lauren walked into the courtroom with her lawyer and Derek in tow. He looked uneasy, slouched in his seat like he wanted to disappear. Lauren, though, was in full performance mode, strutting in like the star of her own tragedy, radiating fake sincerity. Her lawyer opened by portraying her as a devoted sister. "My client only wants to protect her brother," he said. "She's concerned about Miss Margaret's undue influence and believes the inheritance isn't being managed in his best interest." I was furious. Lauren hadn't cared about me or Dad in years, and now she was playing the savior. Aunt Margaret gave me a look, signaling me to stay calm. Then it was our turn. Mr. Thompson dismantled Lauren's claims methodically. He presented financial records proving Aunt Margaret hadn't touched my inheritance. The account remains secure per the will's instructions, he said. There's no evidence of misuse or manipulation. The turning point. Lauren's own financial records. Mr. Thompson had obtained them during the legal process, and they laid everything bare. Lauren had burned through her half of the inheritance in 6 months. Luxury cars, extravagant trips, high-end purchases. It painted a clear picture of her recklessness and desperation. Then, Mr. Thompson played Lauren's texts and voicemails to me. Her voice echoed in the courtroom, switching between manipulative pleading and outright threats. "You're hoarding all this money while Derek's suffering," one message said. "If you don't help us, you'll be sorry." The judge's face grew stern with each piece of evidence. Lauren's confidence faltered. She fidgeted, avoiding eye contact, realizing her plan was unraveling. When it was my turn to speak, my heart pounded, but I stood up determined. "Your Honor," I said, "this isn't about protecting me. It's about my sister refusing to take responsibility for her choices. She received the same inheritance I did, half of everything our father left us. She spent hers on things she didn't need. Now she's after mine to fix her mistakes." I looked at Lauren, who glared back, stunned and angry. "But I'm not giving it up. For weeks, she sent me messages, tried to guilt me, even turned other relatives against us, all to gain control. Aunt Margaret, though, has only supported me. She's helped me focus on medical school and honored every one of my father's wishes. Without her, I'd be lost." I sat down, hands shaking, but I knew I'd said what mattered. Lauren took her turn, turning on the waterworks. "I've always cared about my brother," she said, voice trembling. "I just want to help him. Derek's surgery is critical, and I thought we could unite as a family." It was so fake it made my skin crawl. After everything, she still played the victim, but the evidence was undeniable, and the judge saw through her. After reviewing everything, the judge ruled. "The court finds that Miss Margaret has acted appropriately as trustee. There's no evidence of mismanagement or undue influence. Conversely, the petitioner's financial history and communications suggest self-serving motives. The petition is denied." Lauren's face turned red, her jaw tight enough to crack. But the judge wasn't done. "This court will also investigate whether the petitioner's actions constitute fraud or perjury. If so, further consequences will follow." And they did. Lauren was found guilty of filing false claims and attempting to defraud the court. She was fined for wasting court resources, ordered to attend counseling for her manipulative behavior, and issued a restraining order barring her from contacting Aunt Margaret or me. Relief washed over me. Aunt Margaret squeezed my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. As we left the courtroom, Lauren tried to follow us, but Aunt Margaret stopped her with one sentence. "We're finished here." Lauren froze, fists balled, but stayed silent. She knew she'd lost. Derek kept quiet, likely realizing he couldn't charm his way out of this. They left together, Lauren muttering bitterly, but I didn't care. The battle was over and we'd won. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a weight lift. Aunt Margaret and I had stood our ground. Lauren's true colors were exposed, and her plan had backfired spectacularly. She thought she could control everything, but now she had no power over me or my future.